Window to the Beyond, Part 2. This dream was different from all the rest. She had never crossed the threshold before. Well, not since she was a tiny child, but she had no memory of it. Wait, there was a memory, she now realized. Something in the dream state had triggered a memory from her childhood. Not just from her childhood, it was from before. Before the Beyond was out there. Before the old man's eyes had become sad. Before he had become silent. The memory. He was smiling and laughing. His whole face smiled. His eyes smiled. This day he was happy. It was a sunny day outside, in the Beyond. There were others. This seemed to sadden her again. The memory quickly faded. The sadness did not. She sat in the dark, and for the first time that she ever knew, she cried. Something had reached her in the dream. Even though she was not able to see out the window, like she wanted, she still received a message. She had crossed the threshold, and out from the darkness emerged greater light, and within that light a memory of the Beyond, a real feeling, something real to connect to, and a greater realization. There was someone out there looking in. That was the feeling she became aware of before she was disconnected from the dream. Who was it? Who was out there looking in? And why did that sadden the old man so deeply? The next day, she decided that she was going to go into that room. She was not afraid of the punishment that the Beyond would enforce upon her. She had lived her whole life in this place, this shelter and refuge of sorts, this dwelling as they called it, an indefinite, self-sustaining, all-encompassing dwelling. But what was the point? They all did the same thing every day. They all heard the same broadcast. They all went down into the earth chamber and connected to machines. They were not allowed to speak of the Beyond. They often did not speak at all. For what was there to speak of? Nothing ever changed. There was no new ideas to be discussed. There was no point. They were all doomed to repeat the same day, every day, for all of eternity. Sure, most of the dwellers had since become numb to their existence, but somehow she had not, and it had something to do with her dreams. They were all gathered in their usual spots for the time of day. They hardly noticed her. No, not just today, but all days. No one acknowledged her, or any of the others. It was as if they all lived on autopilot, like they were in some sort of video game. They all existed in the same video universe, but they were all doing their own task. But they weren't really doing tasks. They weren't really doing anything at all. They were doing what they had been programmed and accustomed to do. Then they repeated the same thing, day in and day out. Nothing ever changed. The dwellers ceased to exist, all while they still did, continued to exist. So, what was the point? She had never asked this question before. She had never thought this deeply into their circumstances. She just did what everyone else did, what the rules had ordered them to do. What the rules had ordered them to do. She didn't know where all this information was coming from, but she was convinced that there was a way out. The clues were in the dream, and the key to the mystery was in that room with the window. Today was going to be different. Today she was going to observe everyone's patterns. Then she was going to reflect. Then later, at night, when everyone was sleeping, she was going to revisit that room in her dream. And when she was certain about what she was looking for, she would create a plan to get into that room and back out successfully. There was someone out there. She was sure of it, and that person knew how to help her. She sat in her usual spot for a few moments, all the dwellers also in their usual spots. They were not required to sit in any certain spot. They had simply grown accustomed to the same spots after all this time in the dwelling together. And who were they? Who were the other dwellers? She had grown up in this dwelling. The other dwellers were all older than her, varying ages, but no one kept track of their age any longer. Did they continue to age? Yes, they in fact did continue to age, but at a much slower rate, they had been told. So how long had they really been in here? She had aged from a child to a young adult. How long had they truly been in here? Had she ever known who the other dwellers were? Did they even know who they were? Did they remember? So many questions. She observed each one individually. The first was looking at a hologram screen. He stared at the screen, as if it were the most interesting thing. What was he watching, she wondered. She moved closer to where she was then standing directly behind him. She also looked at the screen, but she saw nothing. There was nothing on the screen. It was blank, void of any colors or movement, void of any feeling. There was nothing there. Yet, he stared forward, as if it were greatly entertaining. She observed him for a moment longer. When she was satisfied that there was, indeed, nothing on that screen, she moved on to observe the next dweller. The next dweller was probably the closest in age to her. Had they ever spoken? She was now unsure if any of them ever spoke at all. When was the last time they spoke? What did her own voice sound like? Why did they not speak? She was certain they had once spoke, like they sometimes do in her dreams. In her dreams, the dwellers speak freely, and they seem different somehow. Their movements, those are different as well. And the setting, where they are, is different. They are not always in the dwelling. In fact, most of the time that the other dwellers appear in her dreams, they are in different places and doing different things. What things? She was unsure of what the things were. She knew they were called such names. What those names were, she did not have the slightest idea. She attributed this to not having had any experience with such things. As she observed the lady dweller seated in front of her, she noticed something she had not seen before. The lady appeared to be looking right at her, but it was as if she didn't see her. It was as if she saw right through her. She was afraid now that maybe none of them saw her. And then the worst thought of all. What if none of the dwellers saw the other dwellers? Was that why they did not speak? Did they not see each other? Did they not know that they were there? Then another question entered her mind. How did she see them? What was the purpose if they could not interact? Why were they all here? She had to get back to that room. It was calling to her now. It was louder than ever. After observing each dweller individually, she was certain that none of them could see her. How long had they not been able to see her? That somehow didn't seem relevant to getting into that room, but it felt to be something of great importance. Should she stick to her plan, or should she deviate and speed up the timeline? What were the consequences if she were caught? Would she really be killed? Who would even know? Would anyone even know? No one could see her. How could they know? She decided to veer off plan slightly. Getting into that room seemed increasingly urgent. It felt like she was somehow running out of time. Time. What an odd concept. Time no longer mattered. Had almost never mattered, in her experience. However, it now seemed to matter more than anything else at all. She felt this urgency to get into that room. It was the only thing that mattered. She sat in the dark in her small quarters. She ran through the steps in her mind once more. It was time. Instead of falling asleep when all the other dwellers went to sleep, she crept into the long, narrow hallway. She stood there listening for any sounds in the dwelling. There were none. The dwelling was supremely silent. She walked the length of the hallway, back and forth, at least 12 times. As she walked, she listened for any other sounds that might occur in the dwelling. She had never been aware of this before. There were no sounds in the dwelling. Absolutely none. But how, then, did she know what sound was, and how did she know that it existed? Well, that must have also come through in her dreams. How lovely and how disturbing. The only things she could find connection within occurred only in her dreams. There were no sounds to be heard in the dwelling. The other dwellers were all sound asleep, and they were not even aware of her, and the others when they were fully awake. She paused now, in front of the door to the room that housed the single window. She looked down both ends of the hallway. There was no one there. She turned the knob ever so slightly. Just like in her dream the night prior, the door seemed to want to open itself. As the doorknob gently turned, it released the door from its closed position. It seemed to open itself. It stood there open, beckoning to her from within. She didn't hesitate a moment longer. She quickly crossed the threshold and walked to the covered window. There was some light coming from under the window cover, but not as bright as it was in her dream. That triggered her to realize another dream detail. The window in her dream, it was uncovered. That was where the light was coming from. It was coming in through the window. She walked forward now and yanked down the window cover. As she did this, the room was filled with the light from the beyond. Wow! It was so bright. She shielded her eyes with her hand, giving them a moment to adjust to the light that now filled the room. She turned away from the window now and discovered the room was empty, except for the chair that the old man sat in. Why did he sit in an empty room? Why was he the only one allowed to look out the window? She then turned back to face the window. There was a shadow in front of the window now. It appeared to be that of another dweller. The dweller seemed to stand outside of the dwelling. But how did one stand outside of the dwelling and not die? Or be taken to be killed? How was this possible? She continued to stare at the window. She stared until the shadow disappeared. It slowly seemed to fade backwards, further into the beyond. Was she too late? Had she missed the message? Had she missed the opportunity to free herself from this existence? The opportunity to free them all? No, she didn't believe that she was too late. She couldn't be. The call had gotten stronger, and she had adjusted her plan according to that urgency. No, she was not too late. She was right on time. Now, all she had to do was wait for the shadow to return. She knew that it would, and she would be ready when it did. She stood there, peering out as far as she could see. She had been standing there for at least an hour. There was not much to see. The beyond seemed to be void of color, yet so bright. The land in the beyond appeared to be barren. There were endless sand mounds, as far as the eye could see. When she looked just beyond the furthest sand dune, she could almost make out another dwelling. She moved her face forward, closer to the glass. It was there, but barely visible. The shadow. Is that where it resided? Did it venture from that dwelling over to this one? What if those sand mounds? What if they were all dwellings? She waited at the window for the shadow to return. She started to feel anxious. Even though she knew that it would return, it had not yet returned, and she was starting to feel like she was losing the will to carry on with her plan. Losing the will to carry on at all. What if all that was out there was shadow? What if there was nothing else left? What if it had all become part of the beyond and become nothingness? She moved away from the window and began to pace back and forth in front of it, casting her own shadow across it when she walked past. She slowed her pace till she had paused directly in front of the window again. What if they had all become shadows of their former selves? What if they had all become lost in the beyond? What if they were nothing but energetic remnants of the past? What if it really was too late? Had they all been acquiescent too long? The girl walked closer to the window and placed both of her hands against the glass. But what if there was yet just a shred of hope? That is what had propelled her this far, and that is what got her here, to this point, where she was finally able to look out the window that had been a source of fear and mystery for all of her known existence. How long had they been trapped in their dwellings? Why had no one come to rescue them? It was at that very moment that it all clicked into place. She remembered everything. She became intensely devastated now. She felt the deepest grief fill her entire being. It was too much, all at once. And when it felt overwhelming to hold out that pain, she became angry. She wanted to yell. She wanted to scream for the shadow to come back. She wanted it to please come back. She stood there with her hands and forehead pressed against the glass. She became sad now and started to cry, tears falling down her face and onto the bottom edge of the windowsill. She looked through her tears and onto the ground, to the spot where they had landed near her feet. She noticed now that the floor seemed different. How had she never noticed before? That it was the same light silver as the receptacles. She moved back now and looked to the sides of the window. How odd! The walls were also the same hue. Was this something she had seen in the dream? Well, no, of course not. She suddenly realized she was never allowed in the room, and even in the dream she had not ventured into that room. till now. With great passion, she took her hands and rose them above her head, slamming her fists against the glass, and yelled for the shadow to come back. Come back, she yelled, her voice filled with tears and the heaviness of the pain she carried. Come back, she cried. Come back. Come back. The sound echoed out to the beyond. The sound echoed into all of the beyond. Faint echoes of her cry reached out across the land, being heard by anyone who tried to listen. The sound of her cry and the force of her will to see the shadow again created a ripple effect through space and time, reverberating back to her and somehow cracking through the glass in front of her. She looked now at the crack. Then the shadow appeared. There it was, standing directly in front of her, looking at her as she looked at it. There was something so inherently familiar about that shadow. It was then that she realized the shadow was her. It had been trying to reach her. It had been trying to help her free herself. All this time it had called to her, till it finally reached her. She gasped for air now, as her receptacle door opened as it malfunctioned due to the pressure she applied to the window. She walked forward as her body adjusted to the natural air that was outside of the container that she had been trapped in for all of these years. Suddenly, she was aware that they were still all trapped in there. The other dwellers, they remained in their receptacle. She had to help them. Instantly, she knew this to be the urgency. They had to free themselves, but they were running out of time. She had to figure out how to reach them, and she had to do it fast. The clock attached to the machine indicated there was not much time left. She couldn't let them die in there. These people, the other dwellers, she now realized who they were. They were family. They had not listened to her when she had warned them, and in the end, she was unable to let them go. So she stayed too, and was also encapsulated. And now, they were running out of time.